The conference room on the 14th floor of the Hargrove building had a particular kind of silence that morning. The kind that collects in spaces where people have said difficult things to each other for a long time. I arrived 11 minutes early, set my bag on the chair to my right, and placed a single gray binder on the table in front of me. My brother and his attorney were already seated across the room. My mother sat beside them. She did not look up when I walked in. I had not spoken to any of them in 4 years. The last real conversation I had with my family ended on a Sunday evening in March, in my mother's kitchen, with my brother telling me that I had always been the one who took and never contributed, and my mother standing at the sink with her back to me, saying nothing, which was its own kind of answer. I drove back to my apartment in Charlotte that night and spent a week deciding what to do with the silence that followed. Then I decided to keep it. I was 26 years old. I had a studio apartment, a job I was good at, and a very clear understanding of which relationships in my life were making me smaller. I did not make a dramatic exit. I simply stopped returning calls that felt like cross-examinations. I stopped attending dinners where the conversation always circled back to everything I had not yet become. I left no note. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said in every direction without resolution. My father was the one who kept in contact. Not consistently, not without difficulty, but he called on birthdays and sometimes on ordinary Tuesdays for no reason at all. He was a quiet man who had spent 30 years working for the same civil engineering firm in Raleigh, and he had the particular patience of someone who builds things slowly and checks the measurements twice. He never asked me to come back. He only ever asked whether I was eating enough and whether the job was still going well. He called me on a Wednesday afternoon in September to tell me he had been diagnosed. Stage 3. He said it the way he said most things, plainly, without theater, as if he were reading me a weather report for a city I lived in. I sat in my car in the parking garage beneath my office building for a long time after that call, with the phone still in my hand and the engine still running. I drove to Raleigh that weekend. I did not tell my brother or my mother I was coming. My father and I spent the following 18 months in a rhythm we built without discussing it. I came every other weekend. I drove him to treatment on the Thursdays when his regular driver couldn't make it. I reorganized his filing system, helped him sort through the accumulated paperwork of a life lived carefully and kept poorly, and sat with him on the back porch in the evenings while he told me things about his own father I had never heard before. We did not talk about my brother. We did not talk about my mother. We talked about the things that mattered to him, which turned out to be more various and more interesting than I had known. He passed on a Friday morning in April, 2 weeks after his 71st birthday. I was in the chair beside his bed. My brother arrived 4 hours later. The will was read by his attorney, a man named Douglas Pratt, at a scheduled meeting that my brother had arranged before my father had been gone a week. The meeting was held in a conference room in the Hargrove building, which was, I later learned, the same firm my brother had been using for his own business contracts. The geography of that choice was not accidental. My brother had retained his own attorney for the occasion, a woman named Claire Ashford who wore her confidence the way people wear good shoes, quietly and as if she had never considered any other option. My mother sat beside him in a charcoal blazer and looked at the surface of the table with the expression of someone who had already decided how the day would end. I sat across from them with my gray binder and waited. Douglas Pratt read the will with the careful neutrality of someone who has read many wills in rooms where families have stopped resembling families. My father had divided his estate with a specificity that surprised everyone except me. He left my brother the investment accounts, the lake house in Mooresville, and the contents of the garage, which included a restored 1974 truck my brother had admired since childhood. He left me the house in Raleigh, the property on Elm Fork Road outside of town, and a sum that, combined with the property value, amounted to considerably more than the lake house. My brother's reaction was not immediate. He absorbed the information the way you absorb a physical impact, first stillness, then the slow registration of what has happened. Then Claire Ashford set a document on the table and said they were contesting. The grounds were what I had expected. I had been absent. I had abandoned the family. I had not been present during my father's illness and therefore had no meaningful relationship with him in his final years. My brother had maintained the connection, had visited regularly, had been the one the family could count on. Every word of that was precisely backward, and they knew it. Or at least my brother knew it. My mother, I was less certain about. She had a talent for revising history so thoroughly that the revision eventually became the memory. Claire Ashford spoke for a long time. She built her argument with the confidence of someone who had prepared it well and not anticipated needing to defend it. My brother had made himself the central figure in my father's later years. He had been present. He had shown up. Then my mother asked to speak. She straightened in her chair and looked across the table at me with an expression I recognized from childhood, the particular combination of disappointment and certainty that had always preceded the conversations that left marks. She told the mediator, a calm woman named Sandra Okafor, who had the bearing of someone who had heard everything twice, that I had walked away from this family when it suited me, that I had been selfish since I was a teenager, that my father had been confused by his illness, that he had always had a soft spot for me that I had exploited, and that the woman sitting across this table was not the same daughter who had been loved and supported and given every opportunity this family had to offer. She paused. Then she said it. She said I had never been the reliable one, that everyone in the family knew it, that I had contributed nothing, that I had always taken the path of least resistance, that frankly, and she used that word with precision, I had always been the daughter no one could depend on. The room had the specific quiet that follows when someone says the thing that cannot be walked back. Sandra Okafor made a note without looking up. Claire Ashford began to continue her argument. Sandra Okafor raised one hand slightly and said, calmly, that she would like to hear from the respondent before proceeding. She looked at my binder. Then she looked at me. I brought the binder to the table and opened it. What was inside was not complicated. It was simply complete. There were the visitor logs from the treatment center, every Thursday for 14 months, signed in under my name. There were the mileage reimbursement records I had submitted to no one but kept out of professional habit, documenting 91 round trips between Charlotte and Raleigh over 18 months. There were the receipts from the pharmacy, the grocery runs, the twice replaced smoke detector, the new water heater I had arranged when my father mentioned the old one had started making noise. There were 22 letters my father had written to me over 4 years, not emails, actual letters, in the deliberate handwriting of a man who had learned to write before keyboards existed. Several of them mentioned my brother by name. None of those mentions were favorable. All of them were my father's words in my father's hand. There was also a letter from my employer, the Office of Inspector General, United States Department of Health and Human Services, where I had worked for 6 years as an investigative analyst conducting compliance reviews for federally funded healthcare programs. The letter confirmed my position, my tenure, and at my request, my professional reputation for documentation. Claire Ashford looked at the visitor logs for a long moment. Sandra Okafor read through the documents the way she seemed to do everything, with unhurried attention, beginning to end. She paused at the letters. She read 2 of them fully. Then she set them down and looked at Claire Ashford. She said that the picture presented by the contesting party appeared to describe a set of circumstances that the documentation in front of her did not support. She said this without inflection, the way you state a measurement. She looked at my brother. She asked him directly whether he had been present at any of his father's treatment appointments. He said he had visited when he could, that his schedule had been demanding. She asked how many times. He said he couldn't give an exact number. She looked at the visitor logs without saying anything further on that point. Then she looked at my mother. She said that characterizations of a party's reliability or contribution, in the absence of documentation, carried limited weight in a proceeding of this nature. She said it without warmth and without cruelty, the way someone states a procedural fact. My brother's jaw tightened. His attorney touched his arm. My mother looked at me, not with the expression she had worn earlier. Something had shifted in it. Not remorse exactly, not yet, but the specific expression of someone who has said something publicly that they are now privately reconsidering. I looked back at her steadily. I did not say anything. Claire Ashford made one more argument. a technical one about the property valuation and the equitable distribution of assets between surviving children. It was a reasonable argument in isolation. Sandra Okafor acknowledged it and then noted that the decedent had been a licensed engineer with 30 years of professional experience and had structured his estate with the assistance of legal counsel, suggesting the distribution was intentional rather than arbitrary. She upheld the will in its entirety. The session ended with the specific flatness of proceedings that have reached their conclusion. Claire Ashford gathered her documents efficiently. My brother stood and buttoned his jacket without looking at me. My mother remained seated for a moment after the others had begun to move. I closed my binder and put it back in my bag. As I stood, my mother said my name. Not loudly, just my name. I looked at her. She said she hadn't known about the treatment appointments. She said she had assumed, and she stopped and started again. She said my brother had told her I hadn't been involved, that I had stayed away. I stood there with my bag over my shoulder and thought about what to say to that. I told her that I had learned a long time ago not to announce the things I did for people who were going to argue with me about whether I was doing enough. I told her it had seemed simpler to just do them. She looked at the table. She said that calling me unreliable in front of the mediator had been unfair. I noticed she didn't say it had been untrue. But I also noticed that she said it at all, which was not nothing. My brother walked out without speaking to me. The door closed behind him in the measured way of a man who is controlling the one thing he still can. I walked out of the Hargrove building into a Thursday afternoon that was warmer than the forecast had suggested. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a while, not because I was upset, but because I wanted a moment before the ordinary texture of the day resumed. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with being tired. It is the weight of carrying something for a long time and then setting it down in a room where other people can finally see how heavy it was. My father had known. That was the thing I held onto in the weeks that followed. He had known what I was doing and why I was doing it quietly, and he had written it down in his careful handwriting and kept those letters in the drawer of his desk where his attorney found them after he was gone. He had been a man who checked his measurements twice. He had known exactly what he was leaving behind and for whom. I spent the following weekend at the house in Raleigh, going through rooms at my own pace. The property on Elm Fork Road was overgrown and would need attention before spring. I drove out there on a Saturday morning and walked the perimeter in the gray November light, thinking about what it would take to make it functional and what it might look like in a year if I gave it the time it needed. My mother called me 3 weeks after the mediation. We talked for 40 minutes, which was longer than we had talked in years. It was not an easy conversation. It was not a repaired conversation, but it was a real one, and that was different from what we'd had before. I did not tell her everything was fine. It wasn't fine, and we both knew that, and pretending otherwise would have just been a different kind of silence. I told her I was fixing up the Elm Fork property and that if she ever wanted to see it, she was welcome to come by. She said she might do that. I don't know yet whether she will. I don't know yet what this family looks like on the other side of what happened in that conference room. But I know that the version of myself who sat down at that table with a gray binder and nothing to prove except the truth, that version of me is the one my father believed in. And that is enough to build something from. There's a question I keep coming back to, and I want to leave it with you before I go. If someone in your life has gone quiet, a sister, a daughter, a friend who stopped calling, before you decide you know the reason, I want to ask you something. Have you considered that their silence might not be absence? That some people stop announcing themselves not because they stopped caring, but because they got tired of caring in rooms where no one was listening? When did you last ask instead of assume?